So we are getting very close to having AI smartphone apps that can detect skin cancer. Now, the company Derma may be the first to bring such an app to market for the consumer. So to date, there are only AI-assisted programs for licensed physicians like Sybase's Nevisense. And that is in part because the FDA has not yet given the green light for consumer diagnostic apps. And I sort of understand this as well because, I mean, there is, of course, a risk that something, gets missed, or that you use the app instead of ever going to your doctor. And, it's not going to be perfect, of course. On the other hand, it enables the consumer to, diagnose or check something and, maybe then go to their physician if there is a red flag on this program. So I think we got to evaluate this. There should be a safety mechanism built in. I think the sensitivity on this app should be very low. So meaning that even if the app thinks most likely not an issue, but not 100% sure, it should alert you to say, hey, get this checked out by a dermatologist. And in this sense, I think it's going to be helpful. But I think that's going to be the future, that we have more and more devices that can help us detect disease early and then get treated. Because with skin cancer, if you get it detected early, it's very treatable. If it's detected late, it's a big mess usually. So I think this is something interesting to watch. So not yet, but they're working on it. Number 2, the laboratory giant Quest has made their Alzheimer's Detect test for Alzheimer's disease available. So this blood test can now be ordered by your physician and evaluates the ratio of amyloid beta 42 and 40 in the blood, giving information on your risk to develop Alzheimer's disease. Now, this is something that I'm a bit conflicted about, actually, because the thing is this, having a high risk factor does not mean you will get Alzheimer's disease for sure, of course. Now, if we give you information, what is the consequence? I mean, how do you then, then you get to go to more checkups. We currently don't have any very good treatments for Alzheimer's disease once it manifests, right? Would this just cause increased anxiety of someone? Would they live their life differently in a negative way? Don't know. On the other hand, I think they could use this information and say, well, there are some things that we can do in terms of lifestyle changes that might make a difference. But I think we should all do these changes because it's not just Alzheimer's disease. There's diabetes, cancer, and all these things. And some lifestyle changes that we do will impact all of those. Now, I've talked about this before. Alzheimer's disease can be thought of as type 3 diabetes, so sort of a metabolic disease of the brain. And what is one of the biggest predictors to get that is, of course, impaired glucose tolerance or early or full-blown type 2 diabetes, right? Which is something that develops over time as we get older, as we gain body fat specifically. The risk for developing this, glucose intolerance and diabetes goes up. And if we can attack that early, when we can say, hey, why don't I now, let's say over 40, I'm going to cut down all my sugars, right? I'm going to decrease my carbohydrate intake. I'm not going to eat those C-dots anymore. Those McDonald's French fries, I'm not going to have those because those are crap, no matter how you slice it. So if you can make some of those decisions in your nutrition and then increase exercise, that's another thing that's been shown to delay or hopefully prevent this kind of disease from happening. That's the second thing we can do. So we can be proactive. But I think regardless of this test, we should all do those things. The third thing, of course, is, and I talked about this near infrared radiation, NIR, which you can get from sunlight, or you can get one of those caps. And I did a video about this. You can wear this cap. Again, nothing is commercially available specifically for that. They market these for hair loss right now. Also, I don't know how good they are. Of course, any of those measurements you should discuss with your primary care doctor first. But I think these are at least in development, and these caps that have near infrared, so NIR frequency light, have been shown to be very helpful for the neurons of our brain. And this is for Alzheimer's disease, but also for Parkinson's disease. So I think all of us should probably consider at a certain age to make these changes. If a blood test helps us tremendously here, I don't know. I think we should all assume that we are at risk when we get older to get Alzheimer's. So it's a very prevalent disease. And being scared and then living your life in fear can be detrimental to health as well. I did videos about this. Negative thinking is very bad for your immune system, right? So again, I'm a bit up in the air if this is a necessary test. I don't think I'm going to recommend that necessarily yet unless someone asks for it at this point. A couple of questions. One, of course, on the bread video, very interesting. I'm getting good information from people watching the channel. So another difference between American and European bread apparently is type of yeast and rising time. And that has to do with how long is the dough allowed to rise. And apparently in America, this is a short period of time. In Europe, it's very long and up to 24 hours, which is a bit of a difference because it might break down the gluten a bit more. So it might make the bread more digestible, right? But there are a few other things that we use in the US that we don't use in Europe. And, there are certain things like potassium bromate, which are helping the dough to rise. And that is something that is not allowed in most European countries, but it's used here. And again, it's something that might help the dough to rise faster. So we're saving time. Also, it makes it probably a bit more fluffy to this, more air incorporated in there. We also use enzymes to cause more air incorporation in the bread. And you can see this clearly when you buy bread in Europe, it's much more dense and harder usually, and also doesn't stay fresh as long, right? American bread is very soft and very light. So there are certainly differences. And if there's incompatibilities, these might be involved. Again, this is not 100% for sure, but these are some differences at least that I think might make a difference. And again, for me, here in the US, I don't eat too much bread. In Europe, I do. And it works. To me, it behaves very differently. It's much easier for me to eat the bread over there at least, right? Another question, protein powder. So I talked about it. I take in a fairly large amount of my daily protein needs in a whey protein powder form. Again, everybody needs to talk to their own doctor what's appropriate for you. In general, when you're working out, up to 1 gram per pound per day, I think is okay. For myself, I'm getting a large amount of that from protein powders. The issue is, and I did a video on this, if you have too much protein at one time, there are some risks associated with this. And this might actually increase the risk for atherosclerosis, actually. Might also cause palpitations and can cause actually an increase in heart rate. And that's mostly for proteins that are fast absorbed. We're talking about hydrolyzed whey protein, which I like, but it's a very fast absorbed protein. So I don't use too much of that anymore. I'm still using it, but I'm mixing my protein powders now. So I'm purposely using 3 different protein powders with different rates of absorption to sort of have like a medium there. And then I don't have more than about 30 grams of protein per shake. And that kind of works better for me, I think, because I did notice having a very high amount, and I purposely took a bit much of it, of the hydrolyzed whey protein, I did get a very fast heart rate. It felt kind of weird. So I definitely noticed that. Maybe there might have been a placebo effect, but I felt it and it was very uncomfortable. And I'm using now a casein protein, then a hydrolyzed whey and a regular whey protein. None of them sweetened with any sweeteners, artificial sweeteners, right? I don't like artificial sweeteners. I've talked about them before. I think they're very bad for us. So I'm using either stevia, monk fruit, or xylitol in them. I think those are okay in moderation, small amounts. But again, if you have proteins that are from between fast, medium, and slow absorbed mixed together, I think it gives you a very good staged absorption when you consume the shake. Some of it gets in right away, and the other stuff will get a bit later. I think that's very beneficial. So that's just an aside, but the protein powders, I'm mixing 3 different things now. That might be something that works for you. Again, always talk to your primary care doctor before starting any supplement or medication.